All right. Before we get going, I'll do a quick introduction. I'm Garrett. I report on emerging technologies at Aviation Week. And if we could just go down quickly and introduce yourselves and what you do.
Sure. My name is Christopher Hickey. I work with a law firm named Riley Safer Holmes and Kinsella, and I practice aviation law. So basically, that's product liability law involving air crashes mostly, but it can involve regulatory issues or things that happen at an airport as well. I'm always on the defense, so I'm always representing manufacturers, both helicopters and fixed-wing aircraft as well.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Proudlove. I work for a company called Global Aerospace. We're a worldwide provider of aviation and aerospace insurance. We're actually celebrating our centenary year this year, so we've been in business a long time. We've seen every evolution of the aviation business over the last 100 years, and we're really excited to be very involved now in the emerging technology space with advanced air mobility, sustainability, drones, autonomy, you name it. So happy to be here today and join the conversation.
Hey, good morning. My name is Brian Willows. I work for Bristow Group. Bristow is a global helicopter operator today, one of the largest in the world. We hope to be one of the largest AAM operators in the world in the next few years. I lead our Americas division for the operationalization of advanced air mobility.
All right, so the subject is safety and managing expectations. Safety is a little bit of a euphemism. You could say the topic is, avoiding a crash and injuries and fatalities. Something we don't typically want to talk about and can be kind of squeamish about, but I think it's important that we broach it early on to avoid it and to minimize the risk. This is a global industry, but a lot is going on here in the United States. And a few years ago when we had the 737 MAX crashes, we saw an immediate impact on the speed at which the FAA was working with other programs and certification. This is sort of a shared risk for everyone in the industry. If there's an incident, even in a different aircraft type, it impacts advanced air mobility. So it would be so much worse, obviously, if an eVTOL operator had an incident. With that in mind, I wanted to kind of, talk a little bit about the risks and how do you manage public expectations, including public investors, but also the paying public, the passengers. Does anyone have anything they want to start off with? I've certainly got a few things to go with. Go ahead.
Sure. No, thank you. So I think in general terms, this industry, this burgeoning industry of advanced air mobility, electric aviation, is in a really interesting spot because it's faced with a very unique problem. And that unique problem is that aviation is incredibly safe. We heard yesterday that there are around 150 to 300 general aviation fatalities in the US every year. You can compare that to the fact that there has been one fatality on a November-registered airline since the Colgan Air accident in Buffalo, New York in 2009, which is amazing. And I'm very grateful for that every day that I fly across the country. But compare that to the 550,000 deaths that have occurred on US roads over that same time period since 2009. I'm guilty of putting my kids on school buses to soccer games and so on. I know nothing about the driver. I know nothing about the company that's operating the buses. We do this stuff on a routine basis. This is accepted risk in our lives. I think we would all agree that the risk of us traveling to SFO today in an Uber is far greater than it is to fly back to New York or any other point around the world. So we have to recognize the fact that aviation has this incredibly robust safety record. But we also have to recognize that we are dealing in this room, dealing in this industry with emerging technology. We're dealing with risk factors, risk aspects that we haven't been used to in the past. Urbanization of aviation, electric propulsion systems. And believe me, I get it. There are so many advantages to the aircraft that are being designed. You know, multi-rotor, numerous redundancy systems, automation. I get it, and it's fabulous, and I absolutely believe in the technology that is being developed. But I think we do need to have a healthy discussion around risk and around safety and acknowledge the fact that there will likely be accidents. It's nothing that anybody wants to hear, investors, passengers, but it is, I think, going to be part of the discussion that we need to have on a go-forward basis. So I'm excited for the conversation today because I think companies like Bristow, who are going to be one of the early adopters of these aircraft, most likely from an operator perspective, have a really interesting take on how to bring these aircraft to operational safety quickly and early and in a way that's going to jive with their customer demands. We've also got help on the legal side to understand ways in which companies in this industry can really develop safe contract law, safe contract language, have robust systems in place to ensure that they don't suffer any kind of hiccups down the road if accidents occur. So I think there's an opportunity just to have a discussion around safety and how we can all improve the overall safety of the industry, certainly, but expectations around all the emerging stuff that you guys are doing in this room.
Yeah, I would just add to that. It's from Bristow's standpoint, we have a history of being involved with the launch of new aircraft, helicopters historically. We're the launch customer, maybe one day we'll be the launch customer for the Leonardo AW609, but we have kind of led the charge in the helicopter industry with improving safety in helicopters. And that's not just with the helicopters themselves, but with the subsystems that go on there, TCAS and HTOS and those types of systems that help improve safety outcomes over time. It's not just the pilot's training. Part of the reason that we haven't had a mishap since Colgan is not because the pilots were magically better after the 1,500-hour rule. It's because as technology has improved, it's improved the pilot's capability, and I think it was Rob was talking about this yesterday. It's improved the pilot's ability to manage the system. It's not the stick-wiggling skills that generally get us in trouble, it's the head work. And so by increasing the autonomy with these new aircraft, the levels of autonomy that we're seeing here, it enables the pilot to manage the system overall, and when something is off nominal, he's got other systems to back him up while he's making, or she is making a decision.
Yeah, I'll just follow up, again, as an attorney, right? I have nothing to do with the actual safety of the product. I'm not an engineer. I can't engineer any of these great products that you guys are building, so I have nothing to do with that. But attorneys do have a large role to play in risk management. And just following up with what Chris said, if this technology develops the way I've heard it being developed in the 2 days that I've been sitting in these in this room, and we start moving people around in great numbers, there will be an accident. Okay, and it doesn't mean that it's necessarily one of the aircraft goes down. I just saw up on the screen a mock-up of one of the heliports that might exist one day, where you have 3 of these aircraft out there. Well, you're going to have people that are injured walking out to the aircraft. It looks like people are going to have to climb into these vehicles, right? There's not going to be a jet bridge that goes out to them, perhaps, I don't know. You're going to have people that are going to trip out of that. And every time somebody trips out of one of these aircraft, you're going to have a plaintiff's attorney that's waiting to sign them up. So you are going to have losses, but the biggest part of risk management is, okay, you do have a loss. Now, what does that mean? It can be, in certain situations, catastrophic to not just the company, but to an industry, or it can be something that's manageable. And I'll give you an example. A couple of months ago, there was a trial in New York City involving a tourist helicopter in New York that had to make an emergency landing in the East River. Helicopter flipped over, which is what they do when they're in the water, and the passengers drowned. Now, there were very bad facts there, absolutely bad facts, but everybody else settled out except one person who was, I think he was 27 years old, So he's one of the decedents, 27 years old, single, not married, so no children, no dependents of any kind. A jury awarded $100 million. So that's a single non-dependent was awarded over $100 million. That's going to impact the economic viability of this industry if that becomes the norm, right? But there are other examples where you don't have that. I've had cases even with all of the post-COVID increase in jury verdicts that we're seeing, not just in aviation, but across the board. Even with that, I've had cases that have settled for, a death even with dependents that is settled for, under $1 million. That is something that is very manageable. And so why do you have those different results? You have those different results because you have companies that are doing things. In the case of the East River crash, they had a harness that was not approved by the FAA, and basically the passengers couldn't get out because of this harness that they had. I won't get into the facts any deeper than that. Wasn't my case, so I'm not going to get into it. But there were bad facts there. There were also bad emails from people within the company saying, hey, this is not a good idea. When you have that and you go in front of a jury, as I was taught as a very young attorney, every trial is a morality play. Juries are not going to understand your technology. They're not going to understand why these things fly. It's black magic. But generally, jurors are trying to do the right thing. They're trying to find the right result. And if you have emails that are saying, yeah, this is a problem, we should be doing something about it, but you have nothing showing that you did do something about it, that's something that's something very easy for them to latch onto. Now, even if that had nothing to do with the accident, that's something the plaintiff's counsel will be able to show to a jury, and that's going to be a problem. But if you are taking care, training your people what to put into email, what not to put in email, when problems arise, having documentation that shows that you've dealt with this problem, how you dealt with it, maintaining those records, because a lot of times you're not going to need these records for a decade or maybe 20 years from now. So do you have a proper document retention policy that's maybe getting rid of emails, but is saving the documents where either a operator, customer, somebody has raised a problem and you're addressing it. So you want to have all of that. And that's sort of where attorneys come into this risk management process, where you can't make your product any safer, but you do need to be shown, or you do need to get advice onto how to arrange your documents now, because those documents may become important in 10 years or in 20 years. Now, after an accident, it also becomes, or after any kind of incident, it becomes important to show that you addressed that you notified either it's the operators. If you're the manufacturer, you sent a notice out to your operators. If you're the operator, you sent out a notice to potential passengers. You want to do all of those things. But the bottom line is you need to, particularly with an emerging industry like this, you need to start now, and you need to start preparing for that litigation that will happen. It will happen at some point, but it doesn't have to be catastrophic. It can all be very, very managed, but it will happen, so you need to start preparing now.
Yeah, so one of the focuses of this panel is managing expectations. And generally there seems to be two audiences. There's the passengers, what their expectation of their safety and their ride experience, and then investors, public investors in particular, whose sentiments change with the news media and stuff they read about and experience. For better or worse, this is a global industry. Lots happening here, lots happening in Europe, but now we also see the UAE and China taking leading roles, and some of the reason they're taking leading roles is because they're promising to move faster. Regulators are, for whatever reason, they feel like they have a way to move to market faster. Whether there's some safety risk involved in that, I think it's to be seen, and it's a little bit unclear. But it seems like it's certainly a risk. And so, you could have a situation where an aircraft goes down in Dubai or China, and then somebody in the United States is like, I don't want to invest in an eVTOL company, or I don't want to ride in an eVTOL company, even though they might be to a different standard here in the United States. Apparently there's a tsunami warning.
I was so looking forward to talking about premium.
I'll wait for instructions, but yeah. So the question is, with this sort of large risk profile spread around the world, how do you manage expectations? Like, yeah, there's something over there in that other country might be going wrong, but here, what we're doing, Bristow or Joby or Archer or whatnot, we're different. This is our standard of safety. How do you explain that to the public, whether they're passengers or investors?
Great question. Safety is, we use this term that safety is paramount. It's the pinnacle of everything we do. And if that was true, we would never get off the couch. So we talked, Chris did a good job pointing out the safety risk of flying an aircraft versus driving to the airport. And so at Bristow and any long-term operator, we have learned lessons about safety over time and what we're doing today that apply immediately to what we're getting ready to go do. We work with governments around the world, so CAA, GACA in Saudi Arabia. We're not doing much work in Dubai or in China, or any work in China. But you're right. There are civil aviation authorities that are promising to move faster. And I think what I would say is we want every certifier to move as fast as possible, but not faster. And so just because you have less red tape in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or in Dubai, I don't necessarily think that means that they're being less safe. It means that in some cases, it means that their procedures allow them to move more quickly. And I can tell you at the end of the day that Bristow, and I'm not going to speak for Joby or Archer or any other operator, but I feel confident in saying as a general rule, no one is going to put a pilot and a passenger in an aircraft unless we 100% believe it is safe. At the end of the day, it falls to the pilot, not even just to Bristow, but to the individual pilot to make that decision. Is this a safe, can I go fly this aircraft safely today? Now, back that up a step, it's incumbent on Bristow to make sure that when we are purchasing an aircraft, that we've done the due diligence, that we know the team, that we know as much as we can about that aircraft before we put passengers on it. And so when we think about how we're going to launch operations and help mitigate some of that risk, early days we'll just move cargo. We'll do it over rural areas, we'll do it over water, not over water, like extended over water, but over places where we're not going to land on somebody or on a car. Once we've proven to ourselves that we know that the aircraft is safe and that we know how to operate the aircraft safely, then we'll move into passenger operations and then to more dense operations.
From an insurer's perspective.
Sure, yeah, no, I think Brian's correct. I don't think that there's necessarily going to be a significant difference in safety, certainly not a difference in approach from the operators, whether they're operating in Dubai, New Zealand, the US, anywhere. I think they're all laser focused on developing safe services and not having that accident that may impact their reputation. I don't think necessarily whether the accident happens in Dubai or in the US, it's still going to make news. So I think they're all very laser focused on achieving the same level of safety. And I think, Brian, you're correct. It's probably more a question of just having earlier access to those markets with the same aircraft, with the same safe systems that will determine where they operate first. But we've asked these questions of our customers, and we've been very satisfied that there's no corner cutting. It's not like companies are going to different jurisdictions to push the boundaries of doing things that they would otherwise not be able to do in the US.
Yeah, based on my experience, I would just, this is sort of related. It's not exactly answering the question, but particularly in the helicopter industry, there are a lot of counterfeit parts now that are coming onto the market that are being manufactured in places outside of Europe, outside of the United States. And as you move forward, I don't know where you're sourcing your products from, but you have to be mindful of that the FAA plays a big role in certifying any part or any aircraft, any part that goes on an aircraft that's operating in the United States. And if you're sourcing parts from various places around the world, you have to be aware that maybe that's not a part that has actually been properly certified. That is a problem within the aviation industry, and that's something also that I would look towards the insurer, whoever your insurer is, because they really have the best information when it comes to what's going on around the world. As an attorney, I practice in the United States, and I, deal with cases in the United States, but usually your insurer knows what's going on around the world. And if there is a problem, or if there are parts coming out of a certain area of the world, they'll know about it. And that's why you need to, I believe in managing risk, it's a team effort. It has to be a team effort. It's the company, it's your insurer, and then it's also your attorneys as well that can help out in that area. But in situations like that, I think it's really your insurers that you have to be looking towards to help you out there. So.
Since we're talking about your line of business, I think there's a good question here. What are the key factors beyond that stamp of certification that's going to be driving insurance pricing for these companies, these air taxi operators?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because typically aviation has been an evolving industry. The technology has changed gradually. Certainly there have been major milestones like the introduction of a jet engine and things like that. But for the most part, the technology has evolved, introduction of various software components. But here we're talking about essentially some pretty spectacularly new risk factors, all in one, multi-motor, electric, urban. So we are having to approach the subject of evaluation pretty carefully. And I would say that working with customers, working with the industry to really understand what they are focused on, how they are approaching risk, is the key for us. Because I'll be perfectly honest with you, we don't know the right questions to be asking. We aren't battery cell experts. We aren't avionics experts. We have a good understanding of the current aviation safety environment, and we have a good understanding of what drives safety from a piloted aircraft perspective in terms of minimum hours and things like that. And we can see in our accident records what influences accidents. But for a new industry like this, for new emerging technologies, we just have to get as close to our customers as possible and really understand from them what is keeping them up at night, what is driving their discussions. And if I can add to that, just a piece of advice for companies here that are perhaps developing the technologies, developing aircraft, or working, supplying parts, bring insurers into your discussions early. We are not typical investors. We're not going to write you a check. But in many ways, we are investors because we are putting up our capital to allow your businesses to grow and develop. So to that extent, treat us like investors, bring us into the conversation, develop that rapport, that relationship. Let us understand the safety initiatives that you're working on, because the call at 5:30 on a Friday afternoon to say, hey, we're doing a test flight tomorrow, we need insurance, doesn't go well. So talk to us as you go through the process, and because that will ultimately really help us become what we want to be, which is an industry that helps enable your technology, not any kind of barrier to aircraft entry into service. The question of price is up here as well, which I can address quickly. There was an old saying when I started in the insurance industry in the early 90s, a long time ago now, that British Airways spent more on soap than on insurance. And I don't know if that's still the case, but it's a saying that I think still holds some truth. Insurance is not going to be a significant part of the operational cost once these operations are up and running. In the early days, it'll be a higher factor because we're taking more of that risk initially as the technology develops. But ultimately, insurance is going to be a rounding error on balance sheets. So I think it's important to think about and important when you're talking about budgets and so on. But I don't think it's going to ultimately be a significant number. Don't hold me to that, but.
Brian, you've had some involvement on the helicopter side, participating in working groups to exchange best practices, lessons learned, assessing crashes, trying to figure out what went wrong, and then sharing that with the wider industry. Right now there's people are doing flight testing, and maybe in the next couple of years we'll start seeing operations. What sort of information, informally or formally, should they be exchanging to help reduce instances of accidents? Are there is it the flight profile? Is it the maintenance, like all of the above? Can you explain?
Yeah, so I think what you're kind of talking about today, there's an organization called Heli Offshore that is focused on safety for offshore helicopter operators. That's our primary business today, but we see the same need in AAM, and so we're working to put this group together to have a safety organization for operators, and that will eventually spoke out to vendors and OEMs and things of that nature. To share safety data. Now, what is safety data is a good question. We're not probably going to share. There's a fine line between what's proprietary and what's safe, right? And so we do that dance carefully in the heli offshore world, so that we're not crossing any competitive barriers. But the point is that if there is a close call, or when there is a mishap, and that we take that data as an industry, we anonymize it, and we share it amongst the members of Heli Offshore, and eventually what will be called AMOSA, the AAM Operator Safety Alliance. And we do that in order to raise the safety bar for everybody, or the bar for safety for everybody. There are operators like Bristow that have been around for 75 years. There are new operators that are coming in. There will be continuing to be new operators that come in, and we hope that we will be able to help bring them up to a higher level of safety in a more efficient, expeditious fashion by sharing the safety data the way we do with Heli Offshore, in order to reduce the number of fatalities that will ultimately happen.
Yeah, actually, that brings up an interesting point, that the fine line between proprietary and good to share publicly for safety reasons, but then also you have legal risk. You're recording all this data, you're possibly sharing it, and you were talking about the liability that comes with emails. So someone has a question down here about, there's these unprecedented levels of data coming off these new eVTOL aircraft. Is that a legal risk? Now that these aircraft are so much more, they're recording so much more. Is this just a trove for an attorney to go through and go after somebody, or what? What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you the most common legal answer. Is it depends, and but it primarily, your goal. And it's the goal of every manufacturer, whether it's the aviation industry or not, is to not have an incident. I mean, that's step one, because that's going to keep your insurance premiums down. That's going to give the public confidence in your product and their willingness to ride on these aircraft. So that's goal number one. And so my experience throughout my career in aviation is that the more data that an aircraft is producing and giving us, there have been cases where it demonstrates that there's something clearly wrong, and that is, but that can also help as well, because once both sides understand what the problem is, it's much easier to gauge how that's going to play out in front of a jury, and usually can sort of come to an understanding and then a resolution of that, and then the company can move on. You got to fix that problem and move on. But more commonly, I think having all of that data in most cases has been extremely beneficial, because you're able to show this was not our fault. That, okay, whatever happened here, this was not our fault. And that's what that data does. Because, primarily, aircraft, as Chris has just mentioned, they're incredibly safe. And, I don't know that much about your technology. I've read about it, but looking at the redundancy, about how you can have various engines fail and you can still fly the aircraft, I think this seems to me to be a pretty safe product that's being developed, and the more data that you have coming off of that, I think you'll be able to demonstrate, to a jury, if it got to that point, that it wasn't your responsibility. But beyond that, it also, this goes, again, back to, one of the comments I made just a few minutes ago, is that every trial is a morality play. And if you can show a jury, look at all that we're doing to try to prevent an accident. Look at all the data that we're gathering. Look at, we've noticed problems here and there, we've fixed it, we've done, then you are not getting a jury upset. You're not giving them anything to get upset about. So even if they find against you and find that there's liability, the damages are going to be significantly lower than they would be if a jury looks at this and says, this company doesn't care. They don't care, they're just moving forward, doing whatever they want to do, and they don't care about, now whether that's true or not, it's if a plaintiff's attorney can create that perception, that's when you're really in danger. So the more data that you have, in my experience, it's, all things being equal, it usually works out in the company's favor to have all that information. There are exceptions, but I think it's better to have as much data coming off of an aircraft as possible.
With all that data coming off aircraft, are you, as an insurer, do you feel like you need to level up your risk models, the amount of data you take in and ingest? Are you starting to ask people for more information than you have with your conventional fixed-wing aircraft?
The data that we've tended to assess more than any other is historical accident data. That really is what has typically driven our decision making. We are assessing the viability of looking at data telemetry, coming off the aircraft to determine how insurance premium perhaps may be, may change according to different operating environments. Should the company that's flying 10,000 cycles a year pay the same premium as the one flying 5,000 cycles? But all that is work in progress. We don't know if that repetitive nature of operations, that higher cycle count, is a good thing or a bad thing. So ultimately, there is a safety case to be proven out, and that will just be a question of time and experience and flight hours. But we're always looking at options of how we can use smart data that's coming off the aircraft to influence the way that we price our insurance products, for sure.
I want to get back to the operator. Are there areas that still seem to be kind of big unknowns for operating eVTOLs? Certain parts of the flight profile, certain ways of using these aircraft that you feel like we need to do more flight testing around, or we're not really going to know until we start running these things day in and day out? Where are kind of the risky unknowns that we have to still keep probing?
From an operational standpoint, I don't feel like there's any huge gaps. What we are doing is taking a revolutionary technology and just evolving our existing operations. And so from the way we operate the aircraft, by and large, we think we know most of it. I think the biggest areas where we're going to have some learnings is in how do we maintain the aircraft in a way that allows us to maximize its utilization, right? So we don't really know how is the weather in Saudi Arabia going to affect the batteries, Norway, these extreme environments. What is that going to do? How is that going to degrade the battery? And we leverage the knowledge of Beta and Vertical that are have really robust battery programs to help learn that. But until we get the aircraft in the field and we combine the effects of weather and dust and rain and snow, whatever those things are, on top of the temperatures that the batteries are operating at, and then the cadence at which we're trying to fly, because the way you treat a battery has a large effect on its useful life. And I know that much. If you want to learn more, you can probably talk to Chip. But so that's one of the biggest areas I think we need to learn. And then on the maintenance side, I think We understand, we believe that the maintenance side will be much less onerous than it is today, but how much less still remains to be seen. Which parts are going to outlive their expected life, which parts are not going to outlive their expected life. And so those are the areas where we will learn. And you can't really learn that until you've got it in the field and you're operating at some sort of scale.
We have just a few minutes here left, so if you want to get some questions, please submit. One question I had, and this is kind of from a PR perspective, each of you have expertise in different areas. How do you educate the public about this very sophisticated, hard to understand technology about its safety? It's, to many of them, it looks like a helicopter, or it's something out of the future. Even riding it might be, a little bit jarring and scary. So, how do you put this into layperson speak, whether to increase your business so you have more passengers, or to get more investors, so on and so forth?
I think it comes down to experience, flight hours, repeatability, just get the aircraft out and flying and doing their thing day after day after day. And I think that the safety message will come from that. I think it's very hard to mold a message in this environment of new technology to say, well, there may be issues. I mean, you don't want to, that's not a conversation you want to have. So I think you've just got to make the safety case through repeated safe operations.
It's really difficult to convince, so it sounds weird, but it's really difficult to convince people of something with data. They don't like data, they like stories. And so it's hard to do this today because we don't have the stories to tell yet. We haven't flown the aircraft. We can tell them that it's built to 10 to the negative 9th, and they're like, what the hell does that mean? And so, we say it in conversations like we know what it means, and you think about it, it's 1 in a billion. Okay, so in a billion flight hours, we'll have one mishap, statistically. But that doesn't, our brains don't really work that way. Our brains work with stories, and so until I think to Chris's point, until we've done it and we've been doing it, it's going to be hard to convince somebody who's got a mindset against it with data that it's going to be safe.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I really have nothing to add other than I agree with what they're saying, and that's why you want to avoid incidents as best you can, because it just takes time for the product to get out there and to have a number of hours, and once the public sees that it's safe, then I think more and more people will want to utilize it. I think it's the same thing with autonomous vehicles right now with Waymo. You do see a lot of young people that have no problem. They're jumping into those things, and I myself took one, but it was only on the surface streets. At my age, I'm still, not getting on a freeway is a little bit disconcerting. I'll see how it works over a few years, but then when you're talking about my parents, no way. They're not getting anywhere near one of those things. So I think there's that part of it is, I think younger generations probably will be more willing to adopt the technology very, very early, but I think it still just takes time for the public to understand that these things are safe and that they work. But avoiding an incident, because every incident is going to, it's going to take even longer than to get the public back. So you want to avoid those as best you can.
Great. Well, we have 48 seconds left, so I think I'll give that back to the audience and let them get coffee a few seconds early. Thanks for listening, and thanks, panelists, for your contribution.